Hey everybody, if you look back through the channel history, you'll see that the video for this guy, the Harbor Freight Combo Belt Disc Sander, is one of the more popular videos on the channel. That doesn't necessarily mean it was well received by everyone, but it's generated a lot of comments, including a bunch of questions, and I had an idea for how to fix one of the biggest annoyances I have with this machine. So let's do a part two, see where we end up. By far the most common question I get is, how's it holding up? Well, the original video, I went and looked, it was November of 2015, and it was brand new then. That was an unboxing video. It's now 2019, April to be exact, and the thing is fine. I have not had one single problem with it. It hasn't failed to start on me, it hasn't quit unexpectedly, it hasn't stalled out due to manhandling the work. You know, it's still a Harbor Freight sander. I'm not going to go out there and on a ledge and say, oh, it's the greatest thing ever. It's a Harbor Freight sander. But me, this one that I have and the way I use it, no problems whatsoever. If it dies tomorrow, I'm probably going to go buy another one of these. Question number two is, do you have to use Harbor Freight sandpaper? No, you don't, and in fact, you absolutely should not. Harbor Freight sandpaper is awful unless you're trying to sandblast the thing next to you, because that's what happens. You turn it on and all the sand goes that way. It's a standard 4x36 belt, standard pressure adhesive disc. You can buy the sandpaper at Home Depot, Lowe's, True Value, whatever your local hardware store is, or any number of online retailers. Avoid the Harbor Freight sandpaper like the plague. Question number three is, what did you end up doing about dust collection? Well, I was gifted this. This is the Rockler Dust Right Universal Small Hose Kit. And by the way, this is great. This is the solution to how do I get a hose connected to all those weird sized fittings on all my handheld and cheap Chinese power tools. So this solves the problem of how do I hook up to that dust port effectively and easily without a bunch of weird PVC pieces or something. But once you get hooked up to that, you find out that you have a much bigger dust collection problem, which is really the reason for today's video. We're going to address that. We're going to make that much better. Now, the plan for the improvement process starts with taking off this guard on the back end of the belt. Two screws that attach it to the frame, one of which is easy to get at like this, and then for the rest of them you really want to stand the thing up vertically. Finally, the two on the bottom. While it's standing up is the easy time to take off this bottom plate. It's got 4 screws, 2 on each side. And since I've got it this far apart anyway, I'm going to go ahead and take off this guard so that I can change the belt. It's honestly more than a little annoying that you have to take it this far apart to change the belt, especially when the belt's not in that bad a shape, but oh well. Let's take a look inside that bottom plate we just pulled off, and you will see the fundamental problem with getting a good hookup to this dust extraction port. It pulls the belt down such that it sands. Maybe I can clean this off, you can see a little better. Sands the bottom of the machine. This is all scuffed up. It's actually nice and smooth. Not bad for an 80 grit belt. But it's even chewed up the port a little bit right around here. Now, some of that was me cutting off the safety block things, but the belt has been doing some work there too. So yeah, you can hook up a shop vac or whatever to this machine, but understand that you're destroying the machine and your belt and getting metal dust into your work. That's the worst part of it in the process. So the plan is to go after this back belt cover, which is just plastic and has a ever useful safety warning on it that we're going to ignore anyway, and see if we can't mangle this, which is a shop vac hose end attachment, and with some creative cutting and some epoxy, see if we can't get these two things to form one piece. That will give me an exhaust port on the sander, which is right here where the dust first sort of enters the machine, if you will. But it's also right where the roller is, the drive roller in this case, and the belt doesn't have any slack there. There's no way for it to get sucked down the hose. So I think this is gonna work pretty well, assuming I can get this cobbled together without making a giant mess of it. Joining two round things together is way easier with some templates, so I'm going to use this same online calculator that I used for my Harbor Freight dust collector modification. The guard for the sander was a little bit hard to measure, and in fact, looking at the end result, I probably should have put 3.5 inches in for that. Either way, it's going to generate some templates which you can then print out, cut out, and tape to the pieces to cut. Do note there's a warning in here that this doesn't work real well in Chrome because Chrome, for whatever reason, doesn't print to scale. Neither does Firefox if you have any of these shrink or grow to fit the page things checked, so make sure you look at all of that before you hit the go button. The cut on the nozzle is symmetrical, so as long as you get the thing oriented perfectly straight up and down, you can cut it with something like a bandsaw and it'll make the same cut on both sides. Speaking of sides, I'm cutting on the wrong side of the line here. I'm cutting into the piece I want, which turns out to be a happy mistake. It turns out we want that piece to be as small as possible, but it did leave me with a lot of cleanup to do after the cut was finished. Do yourself a favor, cut yours on the right side of the line. On the upside, I've got a powered sander that has exactly the profile I'm trying to sand, so the cleanup of that piece and the reshaping down to the right size was really pretty easy. The hole in the guard is an inside cut, so you have to start with a drill. I highly recommend either a Forstner bit or a hole saw, something that cuts along the outside edge, because this whole thing is just a little bit janky. I finished up the cut with a coping saw, which turned out to be really easy in the soft plastic, so there was really no need to start with such a big drill. All right, with my pieces fitting reasonably well, I'm going to come in with some super glue and just tack this thing together. This is not what I'm going to rely on to hold it long term. I'm going to come back and gap fill and really bond it down with some epoxy. But this will hold it in place, whereas the epoxy is going to take several minutes to cure, and I don't really want it slipping around. Here's the other reason I wanted to tack that down with super glue. I'm using West Systems epoxy here because I have it and it's going to go bad eventually, not because you need expensive epoxy for this. But I also happen to have this filler, so I can get it nice and thick and pasty, so hopefully it won't run all over the place. But this stuff takes forever to cure. It's almost an overnight deal. So you need the super glue to hold this in place because the epoxy is not going to do it for quite some time. And I just made an executive decision that I'm going to blue tape the inside of this thing so that the epoxy really has no choice but to stay in the gap. Being able to control the viscosity of your epoxy is really handy. In this case, I want it runny enough to get down into the joint, but I want it thick enough that I can build it up, almost like a well. Remember, this thing is going to have to operate under vibration and vacuum, so it needs to be pretty strong. Now you can't see that because the stuff is white on a white sticker, but that is filled in and should set up pretty nicely. The one problem I've got is right here in the front. I had to put quite a bit of epoxy. I got, well, frankly, it just didn't fit that well. And it's probably going to run out as I set it down like this. So, blue tape bra for the epoxy. Boom. Good as new. All right, 24 hours later, and I have reinstalled the guard onto the sander with our new hose nozzle attached to it. There's some good and some bad. Good, it is really on there. I mean, no problem lifting the whole sander with this thing. It is never coming off. Okay, also good, I'm pretty happy with the choice of a 45-degree angle for the intercept, if you will. I think that's going to be really good from a logistical standpoint where my sander sits, and I think the airflow coming off the belt is pretty reasonable straight down the hose for the most part. And I suppose if we're going to talk about the good, we better fire it up and make sure it actually works. All right, well, let's talk about some of the bad stuff. Bad thing number one, this hose, while it will stay, it hasn't come out on me yet, is not really in there as far as it ought to go. And that's because the bottom end of the hose runs into the belt. That is, believe it or not, by design, because I was trying to keep this piece as short as humanly possible. Well, why would I do that? Well, because I was trying to make it so that you could still stand this thing up vertically. But epic fail. This thing is just an eighth of an inch. I mean, I really could shave it down. It would probably be fine. But as it stands right now, this thing does not stand up any longer because the new dust port runs into the support for the table when it's in the vertical orientation. Do I care? No, because I've had this thing vertical maybe 3 or 4 times in the 3 years I've owned it. And all 3 or 4 times were to show that it goes vertical on a video. I've never used it that way. So for my money, for my installation, for my situation, don't tell me why it won't work for you. I'm sorry, but it's not me. This is fine. I'm gonna leave it lay flat. I'm gonna like the 45-degree angle, and I'm gonna call it a day. So it's all tucked in back where it goes, and you can see why the vertical operation is not that important to me. It would be off that end of the machine anyway. Obviously, if you want to sand down the epoxy and paint it black, make it all look nice, feel free. I can't even see it where I have this thing sitting, so I'm not going to bother. Oh, and in case you're wondering, let me pan down. This is what I do for dust collection on the disc sander. I have a Y coming out of my dust collector. I just take the cap off the Y, and that creates enough airflow that the vast majority of what this thing generates gets sucked in here. So it's the usual drill from here. If you've got questions, comments, or a better idea, leave that down below. Hit the like and subscribe stuff while you're down there so I know this is worth doing. And with any luck, won't be a month till I see you next time.